nearly a year earlier than was expected. It's election night in Tasmania.
Peter Gutwein has taken a political gamble, going to the polls early, trying to cash in on his government's successful handling of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The Premier called the election during a brief window of minority government, effectively kicking the Speaker, Sue Hickey, out of the Liberal Party.
Over the next few hours, we'll see if going to the polls early pays off and Gutwein becomes the first Tasmanian Liberal Premier to lead his government into a third term.
Live around the country from beautiful Hobart, this is Tasmania Votes. Hello and welcome to the ABC Election Centre, live from the last tally room in Australia. I'm Sabra Lane.
And I'm Guy Stainer. The polls have just closed across the state, and over the next few hours we'll bring you the results as soon as they arrive here in the tally room.
We've got reporters and camera crews around the state who'll bring you instant reaction and analysis of the results. And of course, it wouldn't be an ABC election without our chief election analyst, Anthony Green. Anthony, good evening. Take us through the current 25-seat chamber.
Well, this is the chamber that was elected at the last election. I'll get onto the slight changes since. At the last election, the Liberals got back with a bare majority, 13, which is a one-seat majority. Labor won 10 seats and the Greens 2. Since then, Sue Hickey has moved to the crossbench and is running again in Clark. And Madeleine Ogilvie was elected at a countback, left the Labor Party and is running as a Liberal at this election. So those numbers have altered slightly, but that's the better way to think of it in terms of the numbers from the last election. And we've got 5 electorates in Tasmania to explain the Hare-Clark electoral system, because people will be talking about it a lot tonight, and on the mainland it's just all gobbledygook. But the Tasmania uses the same 5 electorates for its state elections as it does at its federal. So we have Bass, Braddon, which are the 2 key seats at federal elections, then Lyons, Franklin and Clark. Clark used to be known as Denison, and the drinking game tonight is anyone says Denison, you can have but Clark will try and say Clark all night because that's what it's known as now. But those 5 electorates elect 5 members. At the moment, the Liberal Party have 3 in 3 electorates and 2 in the others. It's a quota-based system. You get 16%, you get 1 seat. 33%, you get 2. If a party gets to 50% in a seat, they win 3 seats. Now, it's slightly more complex than that because it's a preferential system. But essentially, what we're watching for tonight is, can the Liberal Party hold those 3, 2 in the north, 3 in the 2 seats in the north, 3 in central Lyons, and then we've got 2 seats in Franklin they're expected to hold, and Clark, where they hold 2 seats. Can they get a second seat with all the other contests going on there? For the Labor Party, can they get beyond 2 in any of the seats they've got now? It's a harder task for Labor to get to majority. And for the Greens, they hold a seat in Clark and Franklin. Can they push back into Bass and do well in other seats?
We know you're pretty excited by this, but there's also another election happening, the Legislative Council alongside this Assembly election.
Well, I never thought I'd do the Tasmanian Legislative Council election on live national television, but it's a beautiful little chamber with lovely, red velvet lounges. It's got tables these days, unfortunately, all looked over by this magnificent, gigantic portrait of Queen Victoria. It's got 15 members. They're elected 2 or 3 every year over a 6-year cycle. They've never held the election on the same day as the state election. It's normally full of independents, but at the moment there are more party members in the upper house at the moment than there've ever been in Tasmanian history. And with the conjoint elections, there is the chance there could be 2 more party members going into the upper house at this election. Now, we'll get some of those figures a little earlier, but we will cover them, but our main focus, of course, will be on the House of Government, the House of Assembly.
All right, thanks, Anthony, and we'll check back in as soon as we have the first results trickling in.
We're joined tonight on the panel by Labor's federal member for Franklin, Julie Collins, Liberal Senator Jonathan Duniam, and from the Greens, Senator Nick McKim. With us tonight as well is the ABC's state political reporter Emily Baker. It's been something of a chaotic campaign. What are you looking for with the first results that come in?
There's a few things we'll be keeping an eye out for tonight, Guy. One is whether the Liberals can get 4 seats in Bass. Now, that is widely tipped to happen. It's where Peter Gutwein is situated with 2 other popular sitting members, but it would be quite an incredible result, though not unprecedented, of course. The other thing is where the former Premier, Will Hodgman, his votes in Franklin will go. He was a huge vote getter for the Liberal Party there. And then Labor's Scott Bacon in Clark, where his votes will go. And that's quite an interesting contest in itself because we've got 2 high-profile independents sitting there. That's one of them is Christy Johnston. She's running for the seat. One is Sue Hickey, who was a Liberal, now running as an independent. So it's certainly the seat to watch.
And Emily, you also broke the story this week about the candidate up in Braddon, the Liberal candidate Adam Brooks, allegedly dating women under a fake name, and also he's also facing court on firearms charges. What kind of impact do you think that will have?
Sabra, I think it'll be interesting to watch. We know there's been quite a few pre-polls. It'll be interesting to see whether that impacts his vote in Braddon, but I think also whether that impacts his vote at all in the progressive seat of Clark and Franklin, or the Liberal vote that is. Of course, so we spoke to a woman this week who alleges that she dated a man named Terry Brooks for 8 months who actually turned out to be Adam Brooks. Now, that's something that he denies, as he says he will vigorously defend those ammunitions charges. But again, we'll have to wait and see how that plays out.
Jonathan Dunniam, how can your party, the Liberal Party, stand by a man, Adam Brooks, who has been proven to have misled Parliament in the past, and now there are more serious question marks against his integrity?
Well, I guess, Guy, that is your point there about there being question marks is an important point to hover on for a moment. These are allegations that have been made. I understand investigations are underway. Mr Brooks, I understand, has also categorically denied these claims, and I think it's important that an investigation occurs. Ultimately today, though, Tasmanians will have their say, and they'll be able to cast their vote on Mr Brooks and every other candidate.
Is it already an error of judgment, though, to simply pre-select someone that's already has a record of misleading Parliament?
Well, those matters have been dealt with. They've been, Mr Brooks resigned at the time, and that was some time ago now. What we do know is that Mr Brooks has worked very hard up there in the electorate of Braddon and is committed to representing that electorate. We'll see what voters say tonight when the votes are counted from Braddon.
Is it just a case of political expediency to pick someone that's popular in an electorate, regardless of question marks that might be hanging over them?
I think the thing is about candidates of every political colour, and we've seen it right throughout the campaign, a number of issues that have popped up in all political camps with regard to candidates. The voting public are a very switched-on group of people, and they will discern between good and bad, right and wrong, and they will make a decision accordingly. The voters never get it wrong, and I'll stand by that, and I look forward to seeing the results, including out of Braddon for Mr Brooks tonight.
Senator, Barbara, there's issues and there's issues, but we've got a woman who's alleging with documentary evidence and a statutory declaration that this happened to her. She's got a lot of evidence to back that up. Is that not something you think the Liberal Party should have taken more seriously, particularly given the issues in Canberra at the moment?
Sure. Well, look, I think it was only a day or so ago that this information came to light. As far as I'm aware, Mr Brooks was pre-selected, 4 or 5 weeks ago, just before the election was underway, and that information was not held. Those allegations had not been made at that time. Once nominations close, a candidate is on the ballot paper. We all know that to be fact. What we do need to allow to happen is the investigation, as I understand, is underway with regard to some of those documents that have been tendered by the individual making the allegation. And let's let the investigation run its course. And above all else, of course, this information was in the public domain before votes properly started being cast today. So let's see what Tasmanians in Braddon have to say about it. The party only became aware, like you, in recent days, and we have to let processes take their course now.
And Julie Collins, the Labor Party's also had to deal with some baggage, especially early on. Rebecca White had factional politics playing out large for the first sort of 10 days of the campaign, especially over the pre-selection of Dean Winter. And then you had candidates, state presidents, claim that that Rebecca White hadn't shown any leadership. They really seemed to suck oxygen out of your campaign.
There's no doubt we had a rocky week and a half at the beginning, Sabra. I think both political parties were off to a rocky start, to be blunt about it. And certainly, we then regrouped, and I think Rebecca White and her team have done an excellent job, and they've been focusing on the issues of health, particularly, which has been dominant throughout the campaign.
Did that, though, I mean, that Labor really, really struggled during the first 10 days, really, to get any focus on policy at all. It really seemed to took all the headlines away. Will that come back to haunt the campaign, do you think, today?
I think we'll see as the results come in, but there's certainly, I think, in the last week or two, I think things were going Labor's way, and certainly Rebecca White was leading a strong team, and we were focusing really strongly on the health issues of Tasmanians, and there's no doubt we're in the middle of a health crisis, and it'll be interesting to see how Tasmanians vote tonight.
Nick McKim, you've got 2 seats in the Assembly at the moment with Cassie O'Connor and Rosalie Woodruff in Franklin. Rosalie Woodruff only narrowly won her seat last time. What are your chances tonight? Can you actually improve on 2 seats in the Assembly?
I think we can, Guy. I think we can certainly improve on 2 seats. Cassie and Rosalie and their team of candidates have run a very propositional, visionary campaign, a very clear plan for Tasmanians. Unlike both of the other parties, we've had no candidate or internal dramas to deal with during this campaign, and we think this election's wide open, and it's as fluid as I can ever remember it in Tasmania, and I've been around in politics here for a while, and I think there's every chance that Peter Gutman will pull up one short of a majority, and if that's the case, he will have kicked one of the great own goals of post-colonial Tasmanian history in cynically going for an early election to try and capitalise on a global pandemic.
We're going to pick up on a lot of these themes through the night. Well, as we've already heard, Premier Peter Gutman wants this election to be a referendum on his government's response to COVID-19. But as Ellen Coulter reports, other issues like housing and hospitals loom large for many Tasmanians.
I called on the Governor and requested that an election be held for the House of Assembly on the 1st of May.
Kick-started by the ousting of a rogue member from the Liberal Party.
I'm happy I'm out of it. I'm bloody happy I'm out of it.
Peter Gutman is trying to turn his handling of COVID-19 into election victory.
Who do you want sitting in the Premier's chair when the next big challenge comes?
The Labor leader Rebecca White has focused on ballooning hospital and housing wait lists.
This election isn't just about what happened in the past week or the past month or the past year. It's about what's happened over the past 7 years of a Liberal government.
Good morning, everybody.
On the Liberal ticket, some unlikely partnerships. A former Labor MP turned independent, now wearing blue, and an ex-minister brought back in to bring in votes. Labor's lineup caused factional fighting and headlines. The leader was forced to intervene, giving a popular mayor the late call-up.
G'day.
But Labor's troubles with candidates continued. One out of step on key policies.
I will not compromise on principles.
Another told to go over lewd text messages sent years ago.
This appears for all intent as a smear campaign.
The Liberals lost a team member.
That some of these silly restrictions that we're still living under at the moment.
We have a fundamental difference of opinion.
But thought they were kicking goals, avoiding drama. Until their heavy hitter from Braddon, Adam Brooks, was accused of tricking a woman he was dating into believing he was someone else.
He has categorically denied that those profiles are his. Look, I've got more important things to worry about than Mr Brooks's love life.
Pokies were a hot issue last election, but this time a complete backflip by Labor.
We've struck a number of agreements with different stakeholder groups.
They'd absolutely caved in to the Pokies lobby.
The Liberals have tried to remain quiet on gaming.
Now, as much as people want to have a rerun of 2018, that policy was dealt with then.
The Liberals hope rebuilding the economy post-pandemic is their ticket to votes, with big promises for big business.
Together, we're going to build a boat.
With some clear air, Labor came out swinging on health.
The Liberal Party's made big promises, but they've failed to deliver.
The health package that we are rolling out across the state will ensure that more Tasmanians can get the health care that they need.
Where's the money come from now? Did he win Tats Lotto?
Waiting times for elective surgery and ambulances front of mind for voters.
How does Peter Gutwein sleep at night knowing that people are dying waiting for an ambulance?
We do have to do better, and that's why we continue to invest.
The Greens have tried to shift the debate.
The fish farming industry in Tasmania for far too long has got its own way.
Peter Gutwein got social media traction after this big reveal.
There you go. Too easy.
But some Liberal stunts fell flat. While Labor...
Don't get that, will you?
...didn't always hit the mark.
You're off to a good start, aren't you?
After 5 weeks of campaigning, the major party leaders agree on one thing: they only want majority government.
Now, we've got reporters at each of the party headquarters. Alex Alvaro's at Liberal HQ, just down the hall here at the Grand Chancellor, and Laura Beavis is at Labor HQ at the RACV Hotel.
First to you, Alex, where has the Premier spent the day?
Well, good evening, Guy. Well, I'm here, as you said, at the Grand Chancellor. This is where people will be coming and gathering, staff and volunteers, to watch the vote come through. There's not many people here just yet, but we're told that they'll be flowing through soon. Now, where the Premier spent the day, he spent the day in Launceston. He cast his vote with his wife, and he again reiterated today that he won't be leading the Liberals unless they win a majority. And I think if he doesn't win that majority, if he doesn't manage to do that, then it will be a big source of embarrassment for the Liberals, as has been said by the panel, if they can't win the majority. So we'll see if that gamble pays off tonight. I think it'll be interesting to see when he makes his speech tonight, whether he waits for that majority, a clear majority, to make that speech, or whether he, does it a little bit earlier. So that'll be one to watch. In terms of the campaign, it has really been a campaign about the Liberals' pandemic, how they've handled the pandemic, how they've handled the economy, what their record is in terms of that, and creating jobs for Tasmanians. And I think this seat in particular will be a really interesting one to watch here in Clark, where a number of high-profile independents are running. So it'll be really interesting to see what the Liberals can do here.
All right, now we're going to go to Laura Beavis. Labor has said it won't govern in minority either, but do they have a realistic expectation that they can get enough seats for a majority?
Well, Sabra, earlier in the campaign, I'm not sure that anyone would have bet on that. Viewers have just heard about the messy start Labor had to this election campaign, first overlooking and then eventually adding the Kingborough Mayor Dean Winter to their Franklin ticket. In Clark, losing party president Ben McGregor as a candidate as a result of what he called inappropriate text messages that he sent several years ago. But after that rocky start, Beck White has really zeroed in on health as a message, and we heard yesterday that she feels that her optimism has just been going up and up as it's resonated with voters. Labor's taken every opportunity to do doorstops outside of hospitals, outside of ambulance stations. They had a health debate that wasn't attended by the incumbent health minister, the Liberals health spokeswoman Sarah Courtenay, so it was a bit of a one-sided debate. But it does seem to be touching a chord with voters, and Labor's used every opportunity to really hammer on that. It's going to be some interesting seats to watch. In Franklin, where Dean Winter was added to the ticket, he's quite high profile and is expected to draw votes, but it might actually drain some away from Labor's sitting member Alison Standen there. In Clark, Labor's got an interesting competition. They started, as of last election, with 2 Clark members. Then Scott Bacon retired. Madeleine Ogilvie came back on a recount but sat as an independent, and now is standing for the Liberals. And because we've got those high-profile independents, particularly Christy Johnson and Sue Hickey, Ms Johnson, who is the Glenorchy Mayor in particular, is considered she may draw some votes away from Labor, which might make it hard for them to gain 2 seats in that electorate. And we've also got in Braddon, Justine Kay, the former federal Braddon member, is standing for Labor at a state level. Her high name recognition again may draw Labor votes away from Anita Dow and the other sitting Labor member there. So it will be tricky for them to get above the 2 members in those seats. However, Beck White has been continuing to rule out governing in minority. Of course, it's pretty easy for the opposition, as they are at the moment, to say that, because it won't fall to them first to try to form a minority government it will be interesting to know what happens at the end of the night, as Beck White has said that she'll step down rather than govern in minority. We'll see if she's actually presented with that choice.
All right, Laura Beavers there at Labor Party headquarters, and Alexandra Alvaro, thank you, at Liberal Party headquarters. We'll come back to you both during the night. And of course, tally rooms were once the hub of election nights across Australia, where the party faithful and political tragics would gather to watch the results come in. They were phoned in manually and put up on boards, and leaders would come in and declare victory or concede defeat. And as impressive as it looks, the internet has rendered that big wall of results redundant. Tally rooms have been phased out federally in every state and territory except here in Tasmania.
We weren't expecting there to be another tally room event held here after the 2018 election, but despite COVID-19, we're here again, albeit this time it's going to be a seated affair. The man responsible for the tally room is with our reporter on the floor, Leon Compton. Where are you, Leon?
Actually, Guy, I'm not too far from where you're standing right now on the tally room floor. Hello there, it's lovely to see you. And I might take people for a little tour around the tally room, as Sabra mentioned, the last of its kind in the country, before we get over and talk to the man behind the count here this evening. So let's go for a bit of a look around. As I turn around, you can see Guy and Sabra standing there, and our political pundits, of course, on one side or the other. We've got Emily Baker, state political reporter, and Anthony Green over by the board. And of course, like an iceberg, you've got lots more people behind the scenes than the people that you see immediately in front of you. As you mentioned, Sabra, it's going to be a little different this year. Last year, this place was filled with political pundits or tragics who came in to watch democracy in the raw. You could be from any part of the political spectrum and all milling here as the night went on. Tonight it'll be seated, and so you've got 350 seats arrayed around the floor, and already some of them are starting to fill. A lot of people actually crowding behind you because they're getting in to see the ABC News coverage. Up on the stage behind me, you've obviously got the boards that people will be watching as the count comes in, and there's the podium. And so in a few hours' time, as the vote continues, we're going to have the leaders of both major political parties, and indeed Cassie O'Connor from the Greens, come to make their acceptance and concession speeches. But there's a lot to play out between here and there. So let's get over and see the man behind the count. Andrew Hawkey is Tasmania's Electoral Commissioner. Andrew, good evening to you.
Evening, Leon.
When are we going to have the first figures to look at this evening that we can start to process? What time will the first vote start coming in?
So we should see some Legislative Council election figures coming in probably by about 6:30 or just after. I expect the state ones will come in probably 6:45, 7 o'clock.
You mentioned the Legislative Council seats. We've had a snap election, so shorter time frames than normal. We also have concurrent elections, 2 Legislative Council seats, and then the full lower house being voted on tonight. Has that posed challenges for you at the Electoral Commission?
It has certainly complicated a few of our processes. Certainly our polling places have to have, there are 40 or so that are polling places for both the upper house and the lower house, and so they've had to have new processes and new training equipment and extra materials and extra staff, but we think we're right and ready for the challenge today.
What are we going to know tonight? Will we know who has won in both of those Legislative Council seats that are up for grabs?
We'll have to wait and see, Leon. There's a reasonable chance we will know or get a really good indication for Derwent. There's only 3 candidates there, but there are 5 candidates and quite a mixture of people up in Windermere and around the Launceston area, and so I wouldn't be surprised if that takes us to late in the count when we get all our postal votes in.
As we're seeing nationally, there's a growing trend towards pre-poll voting and postal voting. How has that played out here, and what that might that mean for what we actually know tonight?
So Tasmania has been a little bit slower than the rest of the country in actually picking up in the early voting, but we certainly had that increase this year. We had to change our postal voting times, so it closed a week early because of changes to delivery times with Australia Post. And with that, we've had an explosion this week where we've gone from 21,000 state pre-poll votes to about 70,000 by the end of the week.
So when do you talk through the process of counting what is a significant number of those votes? How long will we need to wait until all of those are counted and perhaps the election result is known?
So with the overlap of the 2 elections, we've got one returning officer who's both the returning officer for the upper house and the lower house for one of the divisions. And in that sense, they've got a lot of counting to do. I suspect that the major pre-poll centres, and for example one polling place in Bass in Launceston took 10,000 Bass votes by itself. We'll do some of those counts. So hopefully 50,000 pre-polls will be counted tonight, meaning probably another 18,000 or so that we'll do on Sunday. So any remaining counts that can't be done tonight will be done tomorrow.
So it is possible that those last seats in each of the electorates might not be known and understood until tomorrow or beyond?
Well, again, for the upper house elections, we may know because it's a simpler counting process. Obviously, for the state election with Hare Clark, we certainly will need to go to the 10-day process before we start the Hare Clark. And depending on how the votes flow tonight or fall tonight, we'll get more of an indication for that, but we'll probably have to wait 10 days for some of those closer divisions.
Andrew Hawkey, thank you.
Thanks, Liam.
Sabra, it really is very different here. Virtually every election I've been involved with, bar one, has been in separate party room functions, and it really is a political bubble, and people are contained in their own little world. The victors become very smug. The losers are devastated and cannot understand how they possibly lost. This is really different because people get to eyeball their political opponents, and it does seem like it's a little bit of a crucible of democracy, that you get to see all sides.
Yeah, it is a little bit special. The other thing that's a bit special about this state, which I think is fantastic, is the banning of the how to votes out at the polling booths. I think that's absolutely fantastic. You can go and give your vote completely unimpeded. Senator Dunningham, I want to talk to you, especially in the last fortnight. The Premier really tried to hammer home that message about wanting to lead a majority government, and it was essential that people needed to vote accordingly. But from my reading of it, that Labor's message about health, especially in the last week, seemed to really cut through.
Yeah, look, just on majority government, I mean, it is essential that Tasmania is led by a majority government. We've seen what happens when we don't have one, which is why Peter Gutwein has been working as hard as he has, as has Rebecca White, talking about the need for majority government to lead this state. So that's why they've been saying that. And I think voters have heard that message. On to health. A couple of throwaway lines around cuts to health. Big numbers often do catch headlines and catch people's attention. The claim that there was a $1.6 billion cut to health, as has been proposed by the opposition in Tasmania, is not the case. In fact, over the period of time we're talking about, an extra $4 billion has been invested by the government, firstly under Will Hodgman and then under Peter Gutwein. And, we need to examine some of the facts that are actually there rather than swallow the quick 3-second grab that might catch people's attention.
Can I pick you up on the majority government point, though? If a minority is what voters choose, you said right at the start of the coverage, the mob get it right.
That's right. Yes, well, voters never get it wrong. That is why we are making it very clear through our campaign. Peter Gutwein has said it every day for the last 5 weeks. Rebecca White, just about the same. That majority government is what this state needs. We had a period of time between 2010 and 2014 where, yes, the voting public did return a minority government, and it was one of the most disastrous periods in our history. Unemployment rate reached 8.6% or thereabouts. We had scores of people, thousands of people leaving our state, young people unable to find a job, and that's because of the uncertainty minority government brings. Now, yes, you might have two parties together, but at the end of the day, particularly with the Greens, I might say, there is just so much unpredictability around their policies and what it will do to the economy, and that's why majority government is essential. Yeah.
Senator,
Well,
can I... Oh, sorry. Go
We're
on.
just going to move on, Emily. We've got Michael Ferguson standing by in the north, member for Bass, also Finance Minister. Michael Ferguson, how have you seen the day unfold?
Well, good evening, Guy and Sabra and Emily, and to your panel. Today's been a day that's actually not about the politicians running around. It's been about the people of Tasmania, and it's been their opportunity to have their say at the end of what's been a very busy and productive campaign period of since late March. And we're very grateful for the fact that we've received a lot of encouragement and support. For me and my wife Julie, we enjoyed quietly lining up and voting at Riverside booth this afternoon. And look, it's been a day noting that Tasmanian state elections are run very differently to other elections, so there's no campaigning, and it's a pretty nice day for the voters to just be able to go and vote uninterrupted.
Michael Ferguson, it's Emily Baker here. Tasmania has been lucky to be relatively COVID safe for quite a long time now, but you've been campaigning on this message of how Peter Gutwein handled the pandemic. Talk me through the strategy there, and talk me through how you managed that without actually just spooking Tasmanians into worrying about what might be around the corner.
Well, the simple fact is that Tasmania, under the leadership of Peter Gutwein as our Premier for the Liberal Party and for Tasmanians has been a very effective leader. He's been decisive and in fact not just following health advice but also in those very early days his instinct was to protect, and the early border closure was one that was well ahead of the other states and the other premiers. And that is a simple fact that it's a recognition that there's been a very strong contrast between our leader and the leader of the opposition, who frankly has been very indecisive and has had a lot of difficulty making decisions. Particularly you saw the civil war unfold in the early part of the campaign in the Labor Party. So it's an important contrast because the simple fact is we don't know all of the circumstances about what the future will hold, and I think that it was important for us to let Tasmanians know that majority is actually very important so that a government can govern confidently and deliver its plan, the plan that we've announced during this election campaign. The plan's working, Emily, as you know. We want it to continue to work so that Tasmanians can stay in work and make decisions that are important for their family with confidence.
You're talking about instinct there, and you've talked about Rebecca White's issues with her candidates. We saw you personally calling for one of her candidates to resign over some Facebook posts. We've heard in the last 48 hours that the Braddon candidate, Adam Brooks, has potentially falsified a driver's licence, that he's facing criminal allegations in a court. How can you accept that, and do you accept that personally?
Well, Emily, I think this has been well canvassed, including by your own reporting, and allegations have been made, and Mr Brooks is well and truly on the record as not accepting and denying those allegations. And the people of Braddon in that particular electorate have had their opportunity to think about those allegations and the denial, and their voice is what matters most tonight, and I look forward to seeing the results come in. And I do hope, because I love Tasmania and I love the Liberal Party, I do hope that we see a strong result tonight, and importantly, I'm very hopeful that Tasmanians share with us the importance of majority and stable government, because we know that in Tasmania, with the Hare-Clark system, it's more or less designed to have close elections, but the risk of minority is real. And so we do hope that we get a great result tonight in terms of strong support for our candidates in all of the 5 electorates. We're very grateful, and I want to take this chance to say thank you to everybody who supported us during the day today. And if we are honoured with success tonight, we won't let them down. We'll work our guts out every single day to deliver our plan and keep people in work and look after training and ensure that we continue to have a strong economy and funding those essential services.
Thank you, Michael Ferguson.
Now it's just gone 6:30. We're still waiting on the first results to come in here to the tally room here at the Grand Chancellor in Hobart. And we're going to stick in Bass for the moment. We're going to talk now with Michelle O'Byrne, the Deputy Labor Leader, who joins us now. Good evening, welcome. Give us a sense of what it was like for you out in the booths today.
Well, obviously you can't campaign in a state election in the same way as a federal election, so we weren't travelling around the booths and getting that feeling, but I can talk about how it's felt on the doors for the last 3 weeks, and it's been an incredibly positive campaign for Labor. A lot of conversations around the things that matter to people, about health, about housing. 1 in 8 people are on a waiting list somewhere, and that's an outrageous indictment on this government, and that feedback came back very strongly through the doors.
All right, Michelle, we're just going to hold it there. We'll come back to you in a tick. We're just getting some first figures in. Anthony, tell us, what have you got?
This is one polling place. This is Avoca in the Northern Midlands. 2.7 quotas for the Liberal Party. Labor 2. The Shooters, Fishers and Farmers are running 3rd there at the moment. Just to look at the change in vote, it is only one polling place. The Liberal vote well done. Labor up. Only one polling place, but I always say with election coverages, when I see the first vote arrive, I know everything's working. So we'll over the next hour start to get some more decent figures and some more bigger figures than just those one polling place.
All right, thanks for that, Anthony. Now, Michelle O'Byrne, we're coming back to you. How confident are you that you can retain 2 seats in Bass tonight?
Well, if we take the feeling on the doors over the last 3 weeks, I'd be really confident that we can maintain those 2 seats in Bass. We do need to. That's an important pathway to us achieving majority government, and that's something that Labor's campaigned very strongly for. It has been a difficult campaign for us up here in Bass. We've obviously had a significant loss in my family, and I do want to take this opportunity to thank all of the people in Bass, Liberal, Labor, Green, whatever, who've actually been incredibly supportive and thrown their arms around my family. So I'll put that personal note out there now. It's been a pretty rough week for us, but we're hoping for a really good night for Labor tonight.
Michelle, it's Emily Baker, and firstly I am sorry for your and David's loss. Your father sounded like a really remarkable man, so I am sorry to hear that and hope you've been taking care. Just back to what's happening today, there's people who believe that the Liberals may get up to 4 seats in Bass. Tell me how that's played into your thinking as you campaign and who you put forward and what you put forward.
Well, we can only campaign on our policies, and we've been really comfortable with the policies that we've been talking about, and they've been the conversations that people have had on the door. I know that the Premier decided to take an election very quickly. He created a circumstance whereby he could legitimately dissolve the parliament off the back of wanting to get that COVID response they had in WA. That is absolutely not what we've heard on the doors. And we've worked really hard to make sure that, that our policies meet those expectations of people. And people want health to be sorted. They want people to be housed. They want to have a safe environment. And all of those issues have played really strongly. And with the revelations in the last couple of days, they also want women to be safe and women to be respected.
Michelle, you have campaigned as a party really heavily on health, including outside the Launceston General Hospital in your electorate. Now, the criticism that's easy for the Liberal Party to throw at Labor is that things were harder under the Labor Party, and of course that's when you were Health Minister. How much has that affected your campaign, do you think, this spectre of that period of time?
Look, we've not had a lot of that. The only people we hear talking about are the Liberal Party, and that's because obviously we made some difficult decisions, some really hard decisions during a global financial crisis. What this government did was come in their first government and rip more money out of health, and in fact $1.6 billion out of health during their term. It's easy to get away with blaming the Free Press Party during your first term. It's not easy to do it in your second term, and certainly not easy to do it when you've brought on an election a year early out of pure political opportunism.
And Michelle, talk to me about your ticket in Bass. You've got yourself, you've got Jennifer Houston running again, and then you've got Janie Finlay, who has been running what has been described as her own race. Now, tell me about the relationships between you three and whether you think Jennifer can retain her seat over Janie.
Look, it's going to be interesting to see how the second seat plays out. I accept that, but I do want to say that we've had 5 candidates who campaigned really hard. There's this line about Janie running her own race and somehow being brought in. I've known Janie since she was 14 years old. I'm very confident about where she stands and how she believes in the party, and I'm confident in the work that's been done by Jennifer Houston's team, who have really worked hard to support her. So it's easy to create those kind of things. This is Hare Clark. Hare Clark is challenging. It is just as likely in Hare Clark that the two of them would get up and I might not. That's the way that it plays. But most importantly, every single person, those candidates you've mentioned, but also Adrian Hines is a phenomenal new candidate, and Owen, who I've so much respect for, who's been campaigning for us in the North East. Everyone has worked really hard because we're not here about just getting our own individual wins. Labor's always been about getting a government. Labor's always been about a government that delivers for people, and it's quite clear for the last 7 years, and with the reaction we've had on the doors, people seen through the behaviour of this government over the last 7 years and the opportunism we've seen in the last in calling an election so very early.
Thank you, Michelle O'Byrne.
Here's what the 105 candidates at this election are vying for. The 25 seats in Tasmania's House of Assembly. The Parliament building was completed in 1840 using sandstone quarried at nearby Salamanca Place and Queen's Domain. This is Tasmania Votes, live on ABC TV, and welcome to listeners tuning in on ABC News Radio, local radio in Tasmania and on the ABC Listen app. Hello, I'm Guy Stainer.
Hi, and I'm Sabra Lane as well. Let's go back to Anthony Green. Anthony, you've got some more information for us?
Look, we're just getting very, very, very early figures. Let's go home. Primary vote. their projections of where the figures will be by the end of the night. It's the Liberal Party at 50, but it's only 0.3% counted. Some tiny booths from Bass, Braddon and Lyons, very small ones. Shooters, Fishers and Farmers are polling about 10% at the moment, but we're projecting their vote to be lower than that by the end of the night, correcting for where it's from. So not much change on the numbers we're seeing so far, but they're very tiny numbers, very preliminary numbers, all little tiny. 2 booths from the Northern Midlands in Lyons, a couple of booths from Dorset in Bass, and one small booth from Central Coast in Braddon, so nothing meaningful yet.
Anthony, people watching around the country would be used to early votes coming from the outside booths, rural booths that traditionally favour the Conservative parties. Is that the same?
That's the way it works. I'll bring up Bass just as an example. We've got the Liberal, it's only 94 votes, you see. We've got the Liberal Party on 4 quotas, something like 70% of the vote. They're little tiny rural booths where the Liberal Party normally do very well. So that's what we correct for that on the statewide figures. But it'll just take a while for that to settle down. You get a bit backwards and forwards in the numbers. But yeah, it's a standard thing all around the country. Small booths are counted first. Small booths are usually likely to be most rural, and they tend to be very strong for the Conservative side of politics. So that's why early figures tend to favour the Liberal Party, and then they change during the rest of the evening.
Julie Collins, we heard earlier from Michael Ferguson, having somewhat of a subtle dig on Rebecca White, saying that people should be voting for Peter Gutwein based on stronger leadership, saying that Rebecca White was a little wishy-washy on COVID. What's your reply to that?
That's absolutely not the case. Rebecca White's a very strong leader, and I think the Labor Party have campaigned hard. As I said, I think we had, both major parties had a bit of a mess at the beginning, but we certainly, campaigned very, very hard, and health is certainly resonating out there. So is the housing crisis, and they're 2 important issues. The infrastructure, the mythical bus mall that's never been built in Hobart. People are concerned that the government hasn't delivered when it comes to health, housing, and the infrastructure.
Just picking up on the point that we heard earlier from Michelle O'Byrne, that Janie Finlay and Jennifer Houston could be vying for that second seat there in Bass. What's your reaction to that? Someone like Jennifer Houston, who has tremendous life experience, 6 kids. She also has had serious illness dealing with that in her family as well. It would be a shame in a way to see that kind of loss from Parliament, someone who has great world experience.
Yeah, it would be a shame, and certainly, it is very difficult for those candidates that don't get returned. As we have every Hare Clark election, there are always some people that miss out. It's up to the voters of Bass to decide who they're going to elect tonight. I think the Labor team's a very strong team with both Jennifer, Janie and with Michelle, and the other candidates, Owen Tubbs, and as Michelle alluded to, Adrian Hines has got a great slogan. He's got one of the best slogans about being a brewer, which I think is terrific. And, they've had a bit of fun up there in Bass, and they've been campaigning really, really hard. But obviously it is the Premier's seat. There's no doubt that the Premier had a bit of a rise from COVID, but certainly I think Labor managed to turn the campaign into this is not just about COVID, this is about the last 7 years. Rebecca White did call for the Premier to have a plan to reopen and to make sure that businesses and the community were ready when that happened. Everybody says that the Premier and the government did a great job on COVID, and certainly being an island is a major advantage. And, there was still, of course, a lockdown in northwest Tasmania, and we had 100 infections in this state, and the health system was in such a perilous state that they had to call in the army. So let's not forget that actually at some stage people in the northwest coast had a very tough time during this, and Tasmania also had, per population, quite a high death rate, compared to some of the other states, and it's terrible for those families that lost people during COVID.
And Senator Dunningham, I want to come to you. When you talk about the Liberals talking about wanting to win a majority government, they were very hopeful of trying to pick up 4 seats in Bass. With the Premier and 2 senior ministers there, how hopeful are you that you will achieve that tonight? I noticed that you've been busy on the phone already.
Responding to fan mail, but no, look, it's a tall order to pick up 4 seats in any electorate, and since 1998, when we reduced the Parliament to 25 seats, the only electorate in which it's happened is Braddon, and that was in 2014. So it's really, really tough to do. It would be great for the government to be able to secure a 4th seat in Bass, but we know that that is a tough job. Picking up majority government for a 3rd consecutive term is unprecedented for our party. So we know the challenge is there, but we've put in the hard yards, and hopefully voters will respond accordingly.
All right, and we've got Cassie O'Connor, the leader of the Greens. We've got her up now. Hello, we're crossing to you at the Brunswick Hotel. Tell us, your big smile on your face. Tell us what you're feeling tonight.
Hi Sabra, thanks, and good evening Tasmania. Well, here in our election party in Hobart, we're feeling quietly hopeful. We think that there's a swing on, and that's certainly the feeling we were getting when we were talking to Tasmanians all over the state. People know that we are a party of honesty and integrity, and that you need us in there to look after this beautiful island and its people.
Cassie, it's Emily Baker here. Let's talk about the campaign that you've just run. We know last state election that Rosalie Woodruff in Franklin just scraped in. In the last week of the campaign, we've seen her mostly outside of her electorate, including in Bass and in Clark. Why have you focused on having Rosalie in those places instead of campaigning in her own electorate of Franklin?
Well, for starters, Emily, Rosalie has been campaigning really hard in her electorate of Franklin, door knocking, doing street chats. But obviously, when we've got election announcements to make, there's two sitting MPs. Rosalie, who's an incredibly effective and talented Green representative, is the perfect person to be representing us.
And talk to me about your candidate selection. So you've obviously got Vicar Bailey, who used to run the Wilderness Society here in Tasmania, running with you. Why not run Vicar in another seat such as Lyons? Why would you make it appear almost as though you're competing for votes?
Well, Vicar himself actually made the decision to put his hand up for the seat of Clark. Vicar's just one of the great Tasmanians. He's got this mighty green heart. He's been one of the best running mates I could possibly have hoped to have, and a really important part of our campaign. But ultimately, that was Vicar's decision to put his hand up for Clark. I'm really stoked about it, and the pre-selection panel thought it was great to have him there too. We've also got, I might just say, in Lyons, a fantastic candidate in Liz Johnson, who's been part of the heart and work of that electorate for a very long time, and I'm really hopeful tonight that we'll see a good result for Liz.
And so acknowledging then that it was Vicar's decision, did that give you any concern, Cassie?
No, not at all. I'm so proud that someone of Vicar's calibre and quality would put their hand up to run for the Greens. It takes real guts to run for Parliament. I think it takes extra guts to put your hand up for the Greens. And I've just felt throughout this campaign, I've actually felt stronger and calmer because Vicar is there at my side. I'm stoked.
Thank you, Cassie O'Connor.
Thank you.
In the northwest and along the rugged west coast of Tasmania is the seat of Braddon, taking in the major population centres of Devonport, Ulverston, Burnie and Queenstown. Named after former Premier Sir Edward Braddon, the seat is spread over nearly a third of the state, with agricultural districts in the north and mining and wilderness areas on the west coast. This is Tasmania Votes live on ABC TV and local radio in Tasmania and nationally on the News Channel, News Radio and on the ABC Listen app. I'm Guy Stoner.
And I'm Sabra Lane. Let's get an update on the count now in Braddon. Anthony.
I'll just say first off, we started to colour in our map. We've declared Peter Gutwin elected in Bass and Jeremy Rockcliffe in Braddon. They were dominating their party's tickets, so it's not hard to declare them elected. But Braddon, if we look at the party totals, now a lot of this is coming from Central Coast, Circular Head and King Island, so they're quite remote parts of the district. The Liberals on 3.4, Labor 1.1. Now this ungrouped, I'll have to explain, just to explain that we're showing party totals, but behind them are the votes for the individual candidates themselves. And Jeremy Rockcliffe, far and away top of the ticket. Craig Garland is a fisherman from Montague on the northwest coast. Now, the last by-election in Braddon and the last state election, he polled very well in the small communities in the northwest, and his vote just dropped down afterwards. So I'm not expecting that he'll be polling 11% by the end of the night, but that's still up on his vote in the same areas from last time. Felix Ellis is second on the Liberals, from Adam Brooks. Look at the change in vote that's occurring in those areas, and there's not much of a change in the others, because while as I said, that vote is up for Craig Garland, it's down for some of the others, like the shooters and fishers and farmers, but not much is going on there. But I just thought up that's 1.9% counted. The Liberal Party, we're pretty sure are going to get 3 anyway, so there's no issue there. The Labor vote is currently depressed. We expect that will increase, because we don't expect that ungrouped quota to stay at 0.7 through the rest of the evening.
All right, thanks, Anthony. John O'Dunningham, Peter Gutwin and Jeremy Rockcliffe, officially the first two tonight.
Yeah, 45 minutes in, that's pretty impressive, I've got to say. But I think, as Anthony pointed out, two very popular candidates and long-term members, both of them serving since, I think, about 2002 or thereabouts.
Yeah,
so it's a very long time.
They both ended at the same time. Yep.
Indeed, yeah. And look, I think it's important to note, while much has been made of the government trying to cash in on the handling of the COVID pandemic, I think the Premier and his ministers have been at pains to point out that it's because of the efforts of Tasmanians that we are in the situation we're in, the shape that we're in, and the fact that we have had relative peace in pandemic terms. So, look, it's a pleasing result, and I hope it sort of continues for us, but it's great to see Peter and Jeremy back in seats in Parliament.
It might be due to Tasmanians that we're safe and COVID-free, but it's certainly due to the government that we've gone to an early election. And looking at those results, Adam Brooks looks like he might be struggling. Are there indicators from the booths where those votes have come from that perhaps suggest that Adam Brooks won't pick up a quota? And might that actually be a blessing in disguise for you?
Look, I mean, it is very early days. We are, I think, in those Braddon booths, we were at 1.9%. It is very early on. We'll see what happens as we move across the coast to some of the bigger booths as well. And I think I'll leave the commentary until then. Having said that, though, I mean, look, when Adam Brooks was elected last time round, events did happen. We've canvassed them already. I expect that would probably result in some votes going to other candidates, as you'd expect from 2018. But let's see what happens. He's still a very popular man. I've been spending time up there door knocking on the northwest coast, and the reception's been incredibly positive for all of our candidates. So
even based on those early booths, it looked like his personal vote was down about 6%.
Yeah, well, as I say, only early numbers yet, and they are small booths in fairly remote parts of Braddon. So let's see what happens as we get into Wynyard, Burnie, Ulverston, Devonport areas, particularly where Adam Brooks is from, down the Ulverston, Devonport end of the coast where he's best known.
Senator, just to clarify quickly, so you've been door knocking for Adam Brooks or with Adam Brooks?
No, not with Adam in particular. I've been door knocking with members of the Braddon team, various volunteers as well.
Including Adam Brooks?
Not including Adam Brooks, no, but including general volunteers for the campaign effort up there. And as I say, the feedback about the government and Peter Gutwin's team has been very positive.
And let's talk about Peter Gutwin, because I think when he came in as Premier in January 2020, taking over from the former Premier Will Hodgman, I had to write a profile about him, and actually it was really difficult finding anyone who could put their finger on exactly the kind of person that Peter Gutwin was. What do you know of Peter Gutwin, the person?
Well, look, having worked with Peter for many years now, and I was a staffer for Will Hodgman, so I worked closely with Peter when he was Treasurer and, of course, Shadow Treasurer. So we worked together in those opposition days as well. He's an incredibly disciplined, hard-working man. He's someone who's very committed to the job and very committed to making sure he understands his community. He's very decisive and, as I say, wants to make sure that he does the job that he has to the best of his ability, and I believe he has done that. He's a very private man. I mean, we didn't know he had a panther tattoo until just a little while ago. So a man with probably perhaps a number of interesting facts we'll all find out over time. But look, someone who I believe Tasmanians can relate to very well, and they've accepted, evidently, they've elected him back to the Tasmanian Parliament based on these early figures.
We also now nailed that his handle on TikTok is Pappy G as well. We've got Leon Compton's on the tally room floor. Leon, what have you got for us?
Sabra, what I've got for you is a little bit of the experience of what it's like to be on the tally room floor this evening. As you mentioned a little while ago, this is the last tally room in the country. And of course, while that beautiful tradition maintains, we do have to adapt for COVID tonight. So I'm sitting down, I'm 1.5 metres from our next guest, and that's how it's got to be through the course of the evening. I've been wandering around chatting to people. For some, this has been a family tradition that has lasted for election after election. For others, they want to show their support for a political party or another. And for our next guest, Philippa, she just wants to see a little bit of democracy in the Roar. Good evening, Philippa.
Hi, Leon. How are you going?
Why have you decided to come down tonight?
This is my first trip to the tally room. I'm really interested in local politics. I'm really interested in democracy. I like elections. I like the Hare-Clark system. And I'm interested in what happens tonight.
So you're here from the electorate of Franklin. For you, what were the big issues in this campaign?
I think the way the election came about was really interesting to me. The fact that what was a stable government was somehow manipulated, I thought, by the sitting government. But in Franklin, local issues are things like the sporting precinct there. Labor seems to have some really good policies about that. I travel on the Southern Outlet every day. That's sometimes really difficult. Yeah, just things like that. But the way this election's come about...
It's been an issue for you.
Yeah.
And just a final question, you obviously follow your politics. What is your expectation about how the vote will play out statewide tonight?
Look, I think it's going to be close. I think I don't think the Liberal Party are going to get away with calling the election the way they did and relying on what's happened in other states during COVID. I think that was pretty sneaky of them.
Thank you, Philippa. Have a good night.
Thanks.
It's 5 to 7 and we've now got 1% of the vote counted. And with an update on the seat of Lyons, let's check in with Anthony.
Well, Lyons, the big central electorate, which is Rebecca White's seat, and we've declared her elected. But before I get on to that, these are the sitting members for Lyons. 3 Liberals, Guy Barnett, Mark Shelton and John Tucker, who was elected at a recount when Reen Hitting resigned. For people on the mainland, casual vacancies is filled by recounts in Tasmania, not by by-elections. And on the Labor ticket, we've got Rebecca White and Jen Butler. We're confident looking at the party totals. The Liberals are above 3 quotas, as expected. Labor's votes on 1.5, the Greens 0.64. Shooters, fishers and farmers are doing quite well at the moment on 6%, but these are very small polling places that are in, and I expect that they won't do quite as well in the larger towns. But on the leaders, the leading candidates, Guy Barnett is on there. Let's look at the Liberal ticket. Now, just to explain how the system works, again, for people on the mainland, there are 6 candidates on the Liberal ticket in a column on the ballot paper. We've got them listed there in descending vote order. On election day, those candidates are randomised. They're in different orders from ballot paper to ballot paper. So there's no donkey vote on the ballot paper. It's evenly spread across all 6. So while the ballot paper looks like a Senate ballot paper, the voters determine the order of election because there's no ticket voting. So on the Liberal ticket, we've got Guy Barnett's well ahead, as he is at previous elections. Mark Shelton is second ahead. Stephanie Cameron is ahead of John Tucker. But this is a very regional electorate. You need to know which part of the electorate the votes are from. But if I look at the Labor ticket, Rebecca White is dominating her party's vote. She's got over a quota in her own right, no doubt being elected. And then an even split across the other 4 candidates. Jen Butler was elected on surpluses from Rebecca White last time and other preferences. So at this stage, it's looking 3-2. 3 Liberal, 2 Labor in Lyons as before. But at this stage, the one we're certain of elected is Rebecca White.
Anthony, a short time ago, there was a strap that appeared on the screen that said that there are 61,000 pre-poll votes, which was nearly double the previous number. Will that delay the count in any way at all?
About 2/3 of them will be counted tonight. Those numbers are not large, say, compared to other state and territory elections around Australia. In Western Australia, the vote stopped counting at 40%. Over half of the votes were pre-poll votes. So it's nothing like the numbers you see in other states. Later in the evening, we'll see. But to be honest, you don't get a lot of difference between pre-poll votes and on-the-day votes. All you do with pre-poll and postal votes generally is shift when people vote. Postal votes have a definite conservative bias because it's generally older people, less mobile, who generally are more conservative voters. So that tends to be the way with postal votes. But the big increase in pre-poll voting is just people voting before the day rather than on the day. Although I must say, at the last federal election, Labor won the election on polling day. They had a majority of the 2-party preferred vote. It was that Labor had lost the pre-polls and the postal votes as well.
Nick McKim, you were very bullish at the start of the evening that the Greens could pick up a third seat. Have you seen anything to justify that optimism?
Well, I have actually. There looks like there is, very early numbers obviously, but there looks like there is a swing onto us, and that would mean that we will hold our seats in, if that's repeated, we'll hold our seats in Clark and Franklin, and it puts us right in the game in Bass and to potentially a lesser extent in Lyons. So very early results, but encouraging for us so far.
Who are the members that you think might actually get over the line in either Bass or Lyons?
Well, it'll be our lead candidates, Liz Johnson in Lyons and Jack Davenport in Bass. And I think Bass is an electorate we need to keep a very close eye on, because there's definitely 3 seats for the Liberals in Bass. There's definitely a seat for the Labor Party in Bass. The 5th seat, even on these very early numbers, looks like it could be quite close, and particularly as Michelle O'Byrne does look like she's polling quite strongly for Labor, that may mean enough of a discrepancy amongst the Labor ticket that would create some opportunity for us to come in and win the 5th seat in Bass. So early days, but so far so good.
You say there's a swing to you. Where is the swing coming from?
Well, interestingly, we haven't got any Clark or Franklin numbers in, and generally when our vote comes on or comes back, it would come on to a greater degree in the electorates where we are the strongest. So the small booths are showing a swing to us. Last time I looked, just over 2%. That's in the 3 northern electorates. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the swings to us were greater in the southern seats.
Senator McKim, do you think that the Greens have spent enough time in Bass over the last few years to really deserve or win that 5th seat?
I think we certainly deserve to win it, Emily. Whether we will win it or not, we'll just have to wait and see. And look, to be honest, it wouldn't surprise me if the 5th seat in Bass is one of the ones that we don't know at the end of the night tonight. And along those lines, it wouldn't surprise me at all if we don't know whether Peter Gutman wins a majority or pulls up just short by the end of the night tonight. So it might be strap yourselves in and let the TEC go to work, and we'll find out in a week or so. But look, we've put a lot of time into Bass during this campaign. As someone pointed out earlier, Cassie and Rosalie have spent a fair bit of time up north. We've got a great candidate there in Jack Davenport, who's a social worker, works in child protection. He's lost count of the amount of doors he's knocked on in Bass. So we've put a lot of time and effort into that electorate, and hopefully we'll get a reward.
The numbers are starting to come in. Anthony's got an update for us in Braddon.
Yeah, I know. Again, at the moment, what's happening in Braddon, it's the smaller booths, and you're getting lots of votes up from here around the Circular Head Council. You're getting some from Central Coast, but all the small rural booths, nothing from Devonport, nothing from Ulverstone, Warwick, White Wynyard or Burnie yet. Let's look at the party totals here. Actually, I'll show, just so everyone knows who we're talking about. There are 3 Liberals and 2 Labor members. Jeremy Rockcliffe, he's always the highest polling candidate. He's the Deputy Premier. Roger Jensch was the 3rd elected last time. And Felix Ellis came in a second recount after Adam Brooks resigned. Adam Brooks is back on the ballot paper this time, but he's not a sitting member at this election. And Anita Dow and Shane Broad are on the Labor ticket. Let's look at the party totals. The Liberals are on over 3 quotas, which is as we expected. These numbers are not updated from the last time I looked. Let's see if I can bring them up again. Usually there's a little bit of a lag in the updates as they come through. No, they're not updating. At the moment, the Labor vote has risen since the last update, so I won't go on too far with this. But it's certainly looking like 3 Liberal, definite one Labor, no numbers since then. But at this stage, that's in Braddon. Just look at the leading candidates. As I said, this hasn't updated. Felix Ellis is polling very well, but he is from the far northwest of the state. He's not from the Burnie Devonport end of that electorate. And Adam Brooks is trailing him. But as I said, there's votes further along the coast to come in yet.
Thank you very much for that, Anthony. Firstly, I'm going to go to you, Julie Collins, because we didn't get your take earlier on Rebecca White clearly getting that number 1 position there in Lyons. You must be happy with that, but by the same token, you might be struggling with the 2nd seat there.
I'm pretty confident that we'll get 2 seats in Lyons. I think Rebecca has run a great campaign, and she's a very strong lead candidate for the Labor Party in Lyons. I think it'll be interesting to see those others in Lyons and see what happens. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes 2-2-1 to an independent or something else like that. I just think that last seat we might not know tonight depending on the results. But clearly it's going to be difficult for the government, I think, to get majority government unless they get 4 seats in Bass or 2 seats in Clark. So I'll be keeping my close eye on those 2 electorates.
Do you agree with that, John O'Dunningham? And the other point I want to pick up on the last seat that we looked at with Braddon, that Felix Ellis is doing quite well. Does that surprise you that he's doing better than the sitting minister there?
Look, just on Felix, look, I'm not surprised that he's doing well. He's an affable, approachable kind of guy, and I know he has been working extremely hard while becoming a new father during the campaign as well. He managed to sort of squeeze that in around the job of door knocking, but he's been out and about ever since he got elected. It's only been a short period of time.
August last year. He is a newbie. For people who are outside Tasmania, this guy only was sworn in August last year, and he pointed out that he was the first MP born after the fall of the Berlin Wall, I think. And
yes.
So he's a young guy.
A very young guy, but look, really a real trailblazer and doing a great job up there. And I think the other issue was Lions, is that right? Yeah. So look, notionally the leader of a major political party always does poll well and draw in another candidate as well. So while, again, it is early days, I will look to see how Rebecca White does poll and what that does mean for a second candidate. I know it was close between Janet Lambert and Jen Butler last time round, so we'll see what happens there. I am not sure that we'd see anyone from anyone other than the two major parties in Lions, frankly, though, based on the early numbers as they are rolling out.
As always happens in the Hare-Clark system, we see swings and roundabouts for all parties where candidates from a particular party take votes away from each other. The upside for you is Felix Ellis. The downside is Roger Yench. At the moment, again, we have to preface everything that they're only early votes, but it looks like he's in trouble there.
Look, again, yes, as you say, early votes. The aim of any political party at an election is to grow the pie, not to cut the slices to smaller ones so that we spread the existing vote around more people. So hopefully, as we do go across the coast, as we get to some of those population centres, and Roger's from the Wynyard neck of the woods, his office is in Burnie, so he is better known just west of Central Coast, perhaps not so much up at Circular Head where some of these booths were, I understand. So let's see as these numbers roll in as we head east along Braddon.
I wonder, Senator, we've seen Felix Ellis run a really interesting campaign and, as you say, become a new father during that. The baby has a very similar name to the former Premier, which you have probably picked up on too. In fact, the same name. So what future do you see for someone like Felix Ellis in the Liberal Party?
Oh, look, Felix, I think, has demonstrated he's committed to getting out and amongst those people he seeks to represent. It has been a short period of time, as I was discussing with Sabra, and he wants to make sure that when he does come down to Hobart out of Braddon, he's taking the views of those he represents down with him. So I think that will be a hallmark of his career, whatever shape it takes on from here. It really is about getting out and about and finding novel ways to communicate with people, as he has through this campaign, but I'm sure we will hear a lot more from him into the future.
All right, thank you for that. Now we're going to go to Jennifer Houston, the Labor MP up in Bass. But first, we're going to go to Anthony for an update.
Yes, well, what I'm seeing in Bass in the northeast there will show the sitting members, Peter Gutwin, Michael Ferguson and Sarah Courtenay, which is a Premier and two very senior ministers in the government. They've easily been elected, all three of them, in the last couple of elections, and everyone expects all three will be elected this time. Michelle O'Byrne has got a quota in her own right for most of the time she's been in Parliament. And just as a hint of how important name is, both Michael Ferguson and Michelle O'Byrne are former federal members for Bass. And Michelle O'Byrne holds the distinction as the only member for Bass to be re-elected in the last 30 years. So Bass has been, at federal level, has been a bit of an ejector seat, but two of them have found somewhere soft to land in state Parliament. Michelle O'Byrne is the deputy leader. Jennifer Houston was the first elected at the last election. So if we look at the party totals, the Liberals are up on 3.76, 62%. Our projections are that's going to slide down towards 58, 59%. So that makes it hard to get to a fourth seat. Labor's on 1.38, though we're projecting they'll increase, and the Greens are on 0.53. But if I bring up the leaders, this is all the candidates leading, and Peter Gutwin has got 3 quotas in his own right. This includes Weymouth, which is, I think, where he's from, if I'm remembering correctly. If we just look at the Labor ticket, what's interesting on the Labor ticket is Janie Finlay's a new candidate, is well known in the electorate. She's leading the ticket ahead of Michelle O'Byrne, Adrian Hines and Jennifer Houston is fourth on the ticket at the moment. Now, these are not very representative polling places. This is an electorate where most of the voters live in Greater Launceston and West Tamar, and that's what will decide the election. But at the moment, Janie Finlay's doing very well in that electorate, but it still looks like 3 Liberals, at least 1 Labor, more likely 2 though. The Greens will be encouraged at the moment to be ahead. Their candidate is ahead of the second Labor candidate, but as I said, there's an issue of who the second Labor candidate to be elected is.
All right, thanks for that, Anthony. And Jennifer Houston, thank you very much for joining our coverage tonight. Even on that run-through of information there from Anthony, it's looking hard for you. You might be without a seat after tonight.
Well, it's Hare Clark and anything can happen.
And what kind of a campaign do you think? I know that you've had some family issues that you've had to deal with as well, so perhaps you haven't been as campaigning as much as you wanted to be?
Well, probably over the term of the 3 years, and we were expecting another year, but we campaign all the time and we're in the community all the time, and certainly the feedback we've been getting on the doors and the phones has been really positive. There's been a lot of people concerned about health, and that's been our major push, and that's what we're hearing back from the community.
Jennifer, it's Emily Baker here. Tell me, if you do lose your seat tonight, you did bring a different lens, I think, to the Tasmanian Parliament. You're a Tasmanian Indigenous woman. You had a teen pregnancy. You have a community sector background. What kind of talent do you think you brought to the Parliament, and do you think that that's lacking more broadly in Tasmania's House of Assembly?
I think there's certainly a lack of diversity on the other side of the chamber at the moment. The government has a lack of diversity. There's a great deal of diversity in the Labor team. I brought something different. I am the first Indigenous woman to have ever sat in that Parliament, first Tasmanian Indigenous woman anyway. And I think I did bring a different angle to that. But I think there's also a lot of work still to be done out in the community if I don't get a seat.
And Jennifer, you've picked up on my next question there. If you were to lose your seat tonight, what comes next for you?
It could be anything.
And let's talk about pre-selection. We saw Janie Finlay come in on the Labor ticket. She wasn't a Labor member for very long at all before she was chosen to run. How did that feel for you, or how did that look to you as a sitting MP?
That's not terribly unusual, especially when we've got a very short time frame for elections. So it's not unusual to bring in people who have Labor values, who for one reason or another haven't previously been members of the party.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer Houston.
The seat of Bass in northeast corner of Tasmania spans close to 8,000 square kilometres, with the majority of voters living in Launceston, home to Premier Peter Gutwein. The electorate includes Flinders and Cape Barren Islands and is named after George Bass, the first European to discover that Tasmania was not part of the Australian mainland. This is Tasmania Votes, live across the ABC in Tasmania on the News Channel nationally. And welcome to listeners tuning in on ABC News Radio and local radio in Tasmania via the ABC Listen app. I'm Sabra Lane.
And I'm Guy Stainer. Let's get the latest now from Anthony Green.
Well, I thought I'd do just the overall figures for what we're seeing at the moment. The Liberal vote has slipped. We're projecting them towards 47% of the vote. The Labor Party on 32.8, Greens 13.6. Shooters, Fishers and Farmers at the moment are doing quite well on 3.5%, but I suspect that's because of the rural nature of a lot of the early figures. If we're looking at the change in vote on the polling places we're seeing, there's a drop in the Liberal vote, a rise in the Green vote, and a bit of a swapping around amongst the other parties. At the moment, we're giving, that's the same votes that's go to the chamber, we're giving away at the moment 6 seats to the Liberal Party. We're confident they've got at least 2 seats in 3 of the electorates. We're giving Labor Party 3 seats. So there's a long way to go yet. But at this stage, the overall summary, we haven't got any figures from Clark yet. And the only polling place we've got from Franklin is Southport, which is the most southerly polling place in the country. So it's not always very indicative of the rest of the electorate. So at the moment, we're just the 3 electorates where the Liberal Party do well. There's a small drop in the Liberal vote. We haven't got anything from Hobart yet. So I think it's going to be a long time before we get a good picture of the result. But the Liberals are on track to win 3 in each of the 3 electorates they hold at the moment, but we've got nothing from Hobart.
All right, Anthony, thanks for that. John O'Dunningham, you still feeling confident?
Well, look, I feel very confident that Tasmanians have looked to a Premier that has led the state through unusual and unprecedented circumstances. I mean, we've got to remember there is no how-to manual sitting on the shelf for events like the ones our country, our world has just been through. And so I think that people, when they went to the ballot box, would have looked to indeed how the last 12 months, 18 months have gone in this state, but also then to the plan and what has been announced by the parties in terms of what they do for the next 4 years.
There was a big difference, though, in this particular election where we saw the landslides in Queensland with Anastasia Palaszczuk and in Western Australia, Mark McGowan. We saw state leaders there that fought against Scott Morrison as well as dealing with COVID. That was sort of interpreted too by voters as sort of pushing back against the feds. You didn't have that here. Is that...
Well, look, I think that it's safe to say that, and we saw the reports out of National Cabinet every week, twice a week when they were happening twice weekly. It was not always a unanimous agreement across the states, and I know Peter did have a difference of opinion with the Commonwealth from time to time. But look, that is the nature of these things. There is another important difference between Western Australia, Queensland, and of course what we're now going through in Tasmania, and that is something we've talked about a lot tonight, and that's the Hare-Clark electoral system, which does bring about perhaps a different range of results that you might see in a different, more straightforward electoral system.
Speaking of Clark, we have the first results in Clark. Let's cross to Anthony.
We just thought we'd give you a quick hit on these numbers. Which looks a bit odd because the Liberal Party have got 51%. Now, this is Sandy Bay. So for people in other states, you think Dalkeith, Kew, Vaucluse, it's like the most Liberal part of Denison, of Tasmania, to be honest. And the Liberal Party's first, the Greens second, then Suheki and Labor Party fourth. Clark is a very mixed electorate. Very solid Labor north of the Domain. Very mixed to the south with very strong pockets of Liberal voting. So that's one polling place come in. Good for I think the last time we did Clark, the first polling place in was Ferntree and the Greens were number 1. So it's an electorate with a lot of pockets, but we just thought to tell you that the first figures are in for Clark.
What can you tell us about Christy Johnston, a very high-profile independent, Anthony?
She's the mayor of Glenorchy, which is the top half of the electorate, where Labor's vote is strongest. With only one sitting Labor member, with a relatively weak Labor ticket, she will do very well because she will take votes off Labor in the northern half of the electorate, where Scott Bacon polled well last time and he's no longer on the ticket. Just to let everyone know, it's a very complex contest because Cassie O'Connor usually tops the poll, is pretty much short of a seat in Denison from the Greens. Ella Haddad is the only current Labor member. Sue Hickey was elected as a Liberal last time, upset a party by accepting the role of Speaker on Green and Labor votes, was disendorsed for this election. She's running as an independent. She's a former Mayor of Hobart. Elise Archer's quite popular, a Minister, Attorney General. She will be elected for the Liberals. Madeleine Ogilvie, it's an interesting story here. She was elected as a Labor member in 2010, 2014, defeated in 2018 by Ella Haddad. She was elected on a recount when Scott Bacon retired, but she became an independent, not as a Labor member. And for this election, she's been pre-selected as a Liberal candidate. So that's the complexity of the sitting members there, which we'll be talking about later in the evening. And of course, we have the other independent, as well as Sue Hickey, Christy Johnston. So this will be very complex counting in Clark.
Those high-profile independents represent a fascinating subtext to tonight's vote, and we've got one of those high-profile independents. Christy Johnston, the Mayor of Glenorchy, is in Moona, in Hobart's northern suburbs. Christy Johnston, how have you seen the vote? Those first few polling booths have come in. What's your reaction?
Look, certainly it is very encouraging. We do know that in the north of the electorate, in the half of Glenorchy, we are still waiting on Legislative Council votes to be counted first, but certainly I am pleased. I can see from the results that are coming in that people in Clark are feeling disillusioned with both the parties and looking to independence as an alternative.
And Christy, it's Emily Baker. So you've got your son Harry there with you. He's allowed to stay up late tonight, I read, to see how you go. You've said that you will vote with the community. Who are the people that you will be listening to if you were elected as an independent?
Look, obviously as an independent, it's really important to engage very closely with the community and to work with all stakeholders, including all members of Parliament, the business community, the community sector in particular, to understand what the real issues are, to make sure that I can represent fair issues with them. It's also really important that I assess each particular issue on its merits. So my campaign has been grassroots. My approach as Mayor has always been to go out and consult very widely with my community, and I would take that same approach into Parliament.
You've campaigned mostly on getting light rail through to the northern suburbs and against poker machines. How do you plan on actually dealing with legislation, and where would you say you are on the scale of progressive to conservative?
Look, obviously I will take each issue on its merits and make sure that I, again, consult very widely with our community. Obviously some of my policies that I have had on my website around the poker machines, for instance, are progressive policies. The poker machine industry has certainly been buying elections for a number of years now, and we've seen the enormous harm that they do cause in our community. My community in Glenorchy in particular, $2 million a month goes down to the throat of poker machines, and that's simply not good enough, and I'm certainly very keen to represent those particular issues. The number one issue, of course, of this election has been health, and I have heard the most tragic stories in particular over the last 5 weeks where people have been left on waiting lists for far too long. They've been left in emergencies, but they're simply not getting the community or home-based healthcare. So I will be advocating very strongly for those people in particular if I'm lucky enough to be elected tonight.
And you're one of a number of independents on the Clark ticket in particular. You appeared on radio with Sue Hickey yesterday. Is there a secret meeting of independents every day to figure out how to get this parliament going, or what's going on there?
Look, there's been no secret meeting, but that's the beauty of independence. They can work with one another and they can work with the other parliamentary colleagues as well. I think the people of Tasmania are sick and tired of the petty politics between the two different sides of the Parliament chamber, and what they really want to see is respectful debate focused on their particular issues, and that's what independence can bring to the Parliament.
And say that you were elected as the kingmaker, as it were, tonight. How would you manage relations with one of the major parties? What would you be asking of them?
Look, I have said consistently I won't be doing any deals. How can you possibly trade off health for housing, for instance? Each issue will be dealt with on its merits, but I will provide stable governments. That means that with the government of the day the governor asks to appoint, I will be providing stability. I'll make sure that there's supply and also confidence to Parliament, with the exception of any, of course, gross misconduct. But each issue must be dealt with on its merits. You can't possibly trade off some really important issues in our community, for instance, like health, as I say, or housing, or poker machine reform, or traffic congestion. So all of those issues deserve great attention and scrutiny, and both sides of politics deserve to be held to account.
And picking up on that, Christy, you are already the mayor in Glenorchy, and you've been doing, I'm sure, a lot of door knocking around Clark. If you are not elected tonight, what is the main message that you hope the major parties take from this campaign of various independents?
Look, I certainly hope that both parties take away a message that they need to not take the community for granted, but they need to be out there listening to the community and dealing with the issues. People are sick and tired, as I say, with the petty party politics. They actually want their parliament and their parliamentarians to be focused on the issues that matter to them. They want solutions. They want problem solvers in Parliament, and both parties need to listen very clearly at this election that they need to get on and deal with the issues.
Thank you, Christy Johnston.
This is Tasmania Votes, live from the tally room in Hobart that's beginning to fill up. The crowds are behind us. It's 22 minutes past 7 and we've had just over 6% of the vote counted. I'm Guy Stainer.
And I'm Sabra Lane. Let's get an update on the count. Anthony.
Yes, well, looking at Franklin, which is the electorate we haven't looked at yet, These party totals are based on a collection of Bruny Island, southern Huon Valley and southern Kingborough, rural Kingborough things. And there's some very strong Green vote in the southern channel parts of Kingborough, and that's showing up in these early figures where the Greens are actually ahead of Labor on these numbers. The Liberals are on 40%, which is down from last time. Now, we're projecting the Liberals will be more towards 43. The Greens will be down more towards 20 on the numbers we've got at the moment, and Labor will be rising towards 30. But to be honest, these are not a very representative collection of polling places, so there's more counting to come. But what is interesting to look at, actually I should look at the members for this seat so we get onto this. Jackie Petrusma and Nick Street are the sitting members. Nick Street has come into the Parliament twice on recounts after Paul Harris in 2017 and replacing Will Hodgman in 2020. David O'Byrne and Alison Standen are the Labor members, and Rosalie Woodruff is the Greens member. Look at the leading candidates at this stage. Rosalie Woodruff is the leading at this stage. I said because that Green vote is very high and the Green vote tends to be concentrated on their lead candidate. Jackie Petrusma is now the lead candidate for the Liberals. Dean Winter, the one who's much controversy, is the Kingborough Mayor. Originally the Labor Party wouldn't pre-select him for the seat. The National Executive imposed him on the ticket. At this stage, he's ahead of the count. Now, this is from mainly southern parts of the electorate. There's nothing from Clarence yet, the other side of the river, where Dean Winter may not poll as strongly. But as you can see, that's two Labor members before we get to Alison Standen, the third Labor candidate. I was, again, as I said, not a particularly representative collection of polling places, but it is the first figures we've come across. Now, I needed to do the state numbers here. Statewide primary vote, we've now got 6.7%. We're projecting the Liberal Party to be 51, so it's bouncing around 50. We're projecting Labor on 29.3. They've been bouncing around 30. The Greens currently on 12. Now, that hasn't changed much from between 1 and 6%. We correct for where these numbers are from. So at this stage already we can say we can rule out that Labor can form majority government. I don't think anyone's expecting that anyway, but there's nothing in any number we've seen so far that suggests Labor can get to 13 seats. They've got 10 now, lost one because of Madeleine Ogilvie resigning. So we can say confidently the Labor Party is not going to form majority government. We also cannot say the Liberal Party is going to form majority government. We can say that the Liberal Party will be the largest party in the new Parliament. At this stage, no, we have no idea whether that's majority or minority, but I think it's worthwhile at this stage ruling out that Labor can form a majority government. They won't be able to do it on the vote they're polling, although they may improve their position. We don't know whether the Liberals will meet majority, and if they do fall short of majority, we haven't got enough figures from Clark yet to say what the composition of the crossbench will be. But I think it's worth putting that on the stage at this point of the night.
All right. Thank you, Anthony. Julie Collins, do you agree with what Anthony's had to say to date? And if this bears out that the Labor Party's got 29% of the vote, that would be disappointing to you?
Well, Sabra, obviously we were, trying for majority government. That's what the whole campaign has been about. And certainly, the expectation, given what we did see in Western Australia and in Queensland, I think for the Labor Party to hold our own is going to be a good result, considering what we've seen in other states. But I'm hoping that it'll get up over 30%, and I'm hoping certainly that we see some great Labor candidates into the Parliament.
Julie, can I ask, what percentage vote is expected, do you think, for Rebecca White's leadership to remain intact?
Well, I think if we hold our own, certainly Rebecca has led very strongly. She is and has been campaigning on health very, very strongly, and she's a very strong leader. And I think that the Labor Party team has been united in the last few weeks of the campaign. We've admitted we had a bit of a messy start, as did the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party, of course, still has one of their members or candidates under a cloud. We, of course, at least cleaned ours up and got on focusing on health, which seems to be the main issue that the voters were talking about.
And can I pick up on that? Sorry, Julie. You are on the administrative committee of the Labor Party. We just saw that Dean Winter is polling well. He's a former employee of yours, but you didn't vote for him to represent the party. Why was that?
Well, the administrative committee didn't. I'm not going to disclose how I voted, Emily, and obviously they're internal party matters, and I would never disclose that. But certainly we have a strong ticket in Franklin. It's one of our strongest, I think. So I'm not surprised to see the results we're seeing tonight.
So do you back Dean Winter as a former employee of yours?
I back every candidate on the ticket.
And Dean Winter in particular?
We have a very strong ticket, yes.
Jonathan Dunham, This is an extraordinary election where we're potentially seeing the leaders of both major parties under extreme pressure tonight to hold their positions. We've already heard that Labor cannot win a majority. Rebecca White has spoken repeatedly about not governing in minority at all, but even more strongly worded has been the Premier, Peter Gutwein, who has said repeatedly that he will not form a minority government. Surely it's black and white. If the Liberals do not get 13 seats, his position becomes untenable.
Yeah, it does. Well, he's made very clear what would happen if we don't reach majority government, and that is something that is on public record. We are, though, just at 7% of the vote tonight, and we've just talked about Franklin, where we're getting votes from down the Huon and Channel areas, and that indicates just how patchy the information is at this stage. I remain very optimistic that we will be able to form majority government. I don't think the message of the last 5 weeks that the Premier has been providing ad nauseum is lost on voters, and I think that they will see, in order to continue the strength, the security, the stability we need to get out of the COVID pandemic and the flow-on impacts that we've all experienced, we need stable majority government, and that's what we'll be pushing for and hopefully achieve tonight.
Whether you get majority or not, it's certainly not looking like the landslide that was being projected at the start of the election campaign. What happens to the Liberal Party from now on? Tasmanian voters would rightly be concerned about the fact that why have we gone to the polls early to end up with potentially the status quo, still with 13 members in the House of Assembly?
Well, 13 members of a particular party, in our case the Liberal Party. As it turns out, we lost a member ahead of the calling of the election. It was incredibly disappointing.
With respect, though, no one in Tasmania is buying that argument.
That's right.
That you had the numbers on the floor of the House, they were never tested.
That's right.
And you've taken the Tasmanian people to an early election, and we are looking at the status quo or even a worse result for the current government.
Well, I remain optimistic that we will have a majority government elected tonight, a majority Liberal government.
Which means the Tasmanian people have simply paid for 3 extra years of your government? Is that what it comes down to?
Well, in fact, we weren't in majority government. We had a Member of Parliament who said we guarantee supply and confidence, but as the Premier has repeatedly pointed out, when you pass a budget, to give effect to the programs that you're budgeting for, you need to pass other legislation. There's no guarantee that's going to happen. We could have lumbered on for another 12 months in a minority government situation with a couple of independents, the opposition and Green parties, or we could have gone to the election, which we have, to make sure that we have exactly what we need to emerge from the COVID pandemic, and that is a stable majority government, because anything else will just be turning back the clock to 2010, where we did have a minority government that sent us to the back of the pack, where we had the worst economic indicators, unemployment at 8.6%.
It started on 14, really, because you also had Madeleine Ogilvie. You had Sue Hickey promise supply. So you actually are going backwards if you get 13, because you had 14 votes on the floor.
That's right.
Nick McKim, your take on the vote so far. We've had 10% counted. It does look like the Greens have had a bump, 2.4% swing, but again, it's early days.
Look, it is early days, Sabra. Just to respond to something Jonathan said, I mean, he's rewriting history as quickly and as desperately as he can here. Minority governments in Tasmania deliver great results for this state, and that's consistently been shown, whether it's a Labor Green government or a Liberal Green government as we've had in the past. Now, the situation is, as Guy was saying, is Peter Gutwein has no choice. If he pulls up short of a majority, he will have to resign, because the alternative is for him to turn to the Tasmanian people and say, I've been lying to you every day of this election campaign. And there is historical precedent here. When Ray Groom led a Liberal majority government in 1996, he said all of the same things verbatim that Peter Gutwein has been saying during this campaign. He pulled up short of a majority, he did resign, and we ended up with Tony Rundle leading a minority Liberal government. Now, there is precedent for this, and I reckon Peter Gutwein could be in for a pretty poor night's sleep tonight based on these results.
And Senator, what do we make of Peter Gutwein's judgment here then? He earned praise nationwide for his handling of the pandemic. Is this just a great misstep?
No, I don't believe so. I mean, at the end of the day, regardless of commentary on the matter, the aim was to ensure that Tasmania had a stable majority government to make sure...
Sorry, Senator, you had stable government. You had Sue Hickey in the fold. Peter Gutwein told her he didn't want her there, so she resigned, and then you've called an election.
What the Premier did tell Sue Hickey was based on a question that she asked, whether she would have the support for pre-selection. It was indicated that chances are not, given the things that had happened. It was her decision then to resign, which does in effect put the government into minority. So what we do need, in order to make decisions that actually do help us grow the economy, that help us protect our population when it comes to the health system, create jobs and all the opportunities we need to actually make sure we remain a prosperous state, is to have majority government. That's what this decision was all about, and that, I hope, is what we'll deliver tonight. And I totally refute the idea that there were 14 votes on the floor.
Madeline Ogilvie, when did she join the Liberal Party?
After the election was called, and that is a matter of public record.
The day after.
That's a matter of public record. Now, Madeline Ogilvie scored herself 4,500 votes at the last election she contested as a Labor candidate. So the people who voted for her, including those who pre-selected her in the Labor Party, would expect her to serve out her term as a Labor member. That in no way provides us the stability we need. As an independent, she will vote accordingly. We've just heard from Christy Johnston, who's saying, well, I'll take every issue on its merits. I'll provide confidence and supply, but everything will be decided on its merits. We need stable majority government, and that's exactly what Beck White was calling for, and I think sensibly as well.
How many times did Madeline Ogilvie vote against the government?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head.
I think the answer is zero.
I think I've been pretty busy up in Canberra, but what I would say is we need to make sure that it is absolutely locked in. One skerrick of doubt around majority is enough to create a very uncertain situation, which is what we don't need here. That's why we are having this election. Commentators will make what they have of it. At the end of the day, we are having an election, and I hope tonight we do get the majority government we so desperately need.
All right, now we're going to go to Leon Compton. He's on the tally room floor and he's with the MLC, Meg Webb.
I am indeed, Sabra. Thank you very much. Down on the tally room floor, as it starts to fill up with people around me, maybe a quarter of the 350 seats or so down here are starting to fill with punters as they come in. Meg Webb was elected to the Legislative Council in the seat of Nelson 2 years ago on a very strong position on the harm done by poker machines in the community, as well as a range of other issues. She joins me from the tally room floor this evening. Meg Webb, good evening to you.
Hi, Leon.
So we're listening to Anthony Green do the analysis. 10% of the vote counted. It seems possible, but not guaranteed, that the Liberals will find the 13 seats that they were seeking. How do you interpret that information?
Well, look, I think having seen this government in pure political self-interest take us to an election a year early and pull out all the stops to give themselves every advantage to win, if we see this government hold on to the position they have or even maybe go back a little bit, I think we have to count that as a loss. We have to see that as the Tasmanian people saying, actually, we don't accept this sort of politically expedient action by a government of the day trying to advantage themselves, and they've actually given the government a bit of a slap if we see a backward step.
Let's talk about the Legislative Council. You sit, of course, amongst 14 others in the 15-seat upper house. 2 of those seats are up tonight, and what we've seen is something never before tried, which is a government going to an election on the same date as votes for 2 Legislative Council seats. Are you seeing evidence the Liberal Party have been advantaged by that, as some were speculating?
I think that's absolutely what we've seen. The party-aligned candidates have been thoroughly advantaged by having the 2 elections held on the same day. As you said, it's historically absolutely a first. We have never aligned those election cycles before, for good reason. We have our upper house election cycle arranged differently. We have different rules for those elections, and the whole purpose is to have a level playing field so that independents can compete against party-aligned candidates in a fair and free way, and the Tasmanian people can maintain the function and role of the upper house. What we're seeing today, if we see particularly the independent seat of Windermere go to a party-aligned candidate, that's a real backward step for the functioning of our parliament.
Do you also think it might raise a legal challenge to that result, given that in Tasmania you have about $17,000 as an upper house member to fund your entire campaign, from advertising to corflutes to anything else that you might do, but being rolled in with the state election campaign, it means you get that sort of uplift from your Liberal Party advertising. Do you think this may spawn a legal challenge?
Look, I think absolutely there are enormous questions to be asked about the legality of having these two elections held on the same day and the implications that has for breaches of the Electoral Act when it comes to upper house expenditure by party-aligned candidates. We will, I think, see questions asked perhaps through the courts if the election goes by the way of a party-aligned candidate winning Windermere.
Meg Webb, a final question for you this evening. It's the question that the government wouldn't answer. I asked Peter Gutwin this 5 times. Sabra asked him only a couple of days ago on AM. What is the rate that you will charge the biggest owner of poker machines in Tasmania, the tax rate into the future if elected? That's legislation Parliament is yet to see and will come before you at some point in the future. How will you be handling that as a legislative councillor?
Well, we've absolutely got a process in place where that legislation must come through both houses of Parliament. And as an upper house member, I will be looking at that legislation incredibly carefully, as you can imagine, Leon. We have a duty to ensure that all legislation is robust and in the best interests of the Tasmanian people. So that's exactly what will be happening as it comes through the upper house. All of us, I would hope, will be examining that legislation. It's entirely unacceptable that the Premier has been disingenuous in not divulging what the casino pokies tax rate will be before this election. There is absolutely a deal in play here. There's no way the government doesn't know what that rate is. Either they don't know and therefore they actually haven't completed their policy, or they do know and they've kept it secret. Either way, unacceptable. We actually deserved to know that before we went to this election.
Thank you, Meg Webb.
Thanks, Leon.
Taking in most of Hobart and Glenorchy, the smallest electorate being contested tonight is Clark, covering less than 0.4% of Tasmania. The seat was known as Denison until 2018 and is now named after Andrew Inglis Clark, the co-author of the Australian Constitution and the man who brought proportional representation to Tasmania. This is Tasmania Votes from the Tally Room in Hobart. I'm Sabra Lane.
And I'm Guy Stainer. Let's get the latest from Anthony.
Yes, we're going to do those figures for Clark because we've now got 6.5% counted. The Liberal Party's certain of one seat. They've got 1.76. We're projecting that 29% now. It'll project towards 32. Our projection for the Greens is down slightly from 24 to 20. Labor, we're projecting to be about that figure. So there's a possibility that Labor will be under 20%. And the reason is Christy Johnson on 0.65 of a quota, 10%. She's competing with Labor in that northern end of the electorate in Glenorchy, where she's a very popular mayor. And Sue Hickey has got 9.8%. She's doing quite well at this stage. But the difficulty is both of those are about 2/3 of a quota. It's hard. I don't see both of them getting elected because they are both competing with probably with a second Liberal. There'll be 3 seats. Then there'll be a Liberal, Christy Johnson and Sue Hickey competing for the last seat if those numbers continue. And it's hard for them to get together, though. I should explain to people on the mainland that the candidates are grouped, but both Johnston and Sue Hickey got extra nominators, which allows them to have their own column. You must give 5 preferences for a formal vote in Tasmania. The 3 parties, Liberal, Greens, Labor, stand tickets of 5 or 6. These stood 1 candidate each. So anyone who votes for them has to give further preferences. So there'll be a lot of scrutineers out tonight looking at the votes for Johnston and Hickey, trying to figure out where their preferences go. Because if one of them gets knocked out, they could elect the other, or they could play a role in who else gets elected. Now, what's really important to look at here is the change in the vote. The Labor vote has just collapsed. Now, a lot of that's to do with Glenorchy. A lot of that's gone to Christy Johnson. Sue Hickey is also doing well, so there's been a massive shift. The Liberal vote is down 5%. That they can still win 2 seats, even though their vote is down. And if they win 2 seats there, 2 in Franklin and 3 in the other states, that's 13. But I've just got to say there's a lot of counting to come in Clark, so we can't call that yet. But that's a hopeful sign for the Liberal Party, is their vote's not down much yet in Clark. But as I said, a lot more counting to come. And if you look at the leading candidates, Cassie O'Connor's got a quota in her own right and is almost certain of election. Elise Archer's well ahead of everybody else, and Ella Haddad is well ahead on the Labor ticket. And then you've got the 2 independents before you hit anybody else. Madeline Ogilvie, the Labor turned independent turned Liberal MP, He's third on the Liberal ticket behind Simon Barakis. But again, we'll have to wait and see how those votes unfold. But we'll be coming back to Clark all night, because Clark is going to determine whether there's a minority government or a majority government. And if it's a minority government, it might be depending on one of these independents. So at this stage, looking at these numbers, you're either looking at the Liberals on 12 plus an independent plus Greens, or you're looking at the Liberal Party on 13 and an independent and Greens.
Julie Collins, we've been talking all night about high-profile independents in Clark. Based on those figures, it looks like the lion's share of those independent votes have come at the expense of Labor.
Well, it's only 6% of the vote counted, Guy, so I think I'll wait to see a few more figures before I make any judgments or comments about where that might end up. But certainly it's concerning to see that the Labor Party vote at this stage is down. But also noting that the Legislative Council booths are being counted first for the Legislative Council and the House of Assembly for those booths, and they're traditionally more Labor-leaning, those booths that they're leaving to count towards the end. So it'll be interesting to see what the final figures in Clark look like, and I think it might be one of those ones where we don't get a result tonight.
In both Clark and Franklin, you're currently behind the Greens on first preference vote.
Yeah, I think that'll change for sure in Franklin, because those booths where they have come in from are certainly very Green booths, normally quite Green booths, so I would expect that the Labor ticket will pick up.
You're happy, Nick McKim?
Well, happy so far. I think on these figures you could call both Franklin and Clark as a seat for the Greens. So I think Cassie and Rosalie will comfortably hold on those figures. I think Clark, as Anthony pointed out, is going to be a key electorate. Look, on those figures, there is still an outside chance we could get 2 independents electors in Clark, and the 5th seat in any Hare Clark electorate is notoriously difficult to predict, and again we might be in for a long haul here.
So you're going against our very own guru here and saying that 2 independents are going to get up. That's a brave,
I'm saying that
call.
there's a chance.
There's a chance.
There's a chance.
John
O'Dunningham.
John O'Dunningham, still looking at our primary vote. Sure, 15% counted, but the Lib vote is down to 49.2. That is down on the last election result. If this was the COVID election and people rewarding the Premier, looks like you've gone slightly backwards.
Well, so down 1%, and yes, as you point out, early days, and so let's think about the margin of error that might be there. I mean, just interestingly, a bit of feedback from some of our scrutineers in Franklin. I've been told that with the 4 booths, and this was about 20 minutes ago, though, so it may be slightly out of date, but the 4 booths that were in, Jackie Petrusma and Rosalie Woodruff were neck and neck. With their votes, and Nick Street and Dean Winter were neck and neck too. Now, they would have all been those Western Shore booths, so Dr Woodruff's extremely popular down the Huon, and I think she was a local government member down there, and of course Dean Winter's the Mayor of Kingborough there. Nick Street's from down that way, although Jackie Petrusma is obviously our lead candidate, pretty popular as well. So look, we'll see some votes come in from the Eastern Shore, where you do have some of those more aspirational suburbs and people who may well be more concerned about some of the issues that have been highlighted in the campaign. So we'll see what happens as the vote count continues.
If the Liberals had chosen a more moderate leading Liberal for that particular seat, might it have been a different story tonight?
Look, I mean, it's Hare Clark, and we also have the Robson rotation. The fact is, Jackie Petrusma is the most high profile of the remaining incumbents. She's been there longer and got a higher primary vote last time round. That is what it is, and I think people will just go, I mean, this is Tasmanian politics. We're a small community. Often people will vote for the people they know, they've heard of, they've seen down the street, they saw at the Hobart show, whatever it might be. And so I expect a bit of the name recognition factor will come into it. I know these 2 incumbents have been working hard. We're seeing it with Rosalie Woodruff and Dean Winter as well. Name recognition's a big part of it, and I'm sure we'll see that trend continue as the night rolls on.
And we saw some, for Simon Barakis, has obviously got deep pockets. He's certainly around Clark, there are a lot of banners with his face on it.
Well, interestingly, I note, although I don't have the details to hand here, he has been polling pretty well for a non-member, a non-incumbent candidate tonight. He has, like many candidates, of course, thrown quite a range of resources at his election campaign. Having said that, though, this is not the first time he's run. He is also a member of the Hobart City Council, relatively outspoken on issues that are important to the community he represents. So I think that will see him in a very strong position to have a real tilt at perhaps bringing in a second seat. But it's a tight race. We saw the numbers there before. Madeleine Ogilvie is an incumbent. We'll see which of those two can come up as well.
So we do see Simon Barakis being promoted. We have seen that he does have a lot of signage around, including quite prominently on a CBD hotel for people watching at home. Their sign's been replaced with his name. Now, tell me how Simon Barakis reacted when Madeleine Ogilvie was parachuted in to the Liberal Party on the same ticket and then stood prominently behind every politician at every press conference.
Well, look, I think as one of the Labor candidates answered before, Jennifer Houston from Bass, when asked about Janie Finlay coming on board in Bass, look, this is the nature of Hare Clark politics. There are 5 spots at least to fill on any candidate, on any ticket. And one has to expect that there will be others than yourself there. They may be high profile, they may not be. They may bring a huge range of resources they can throw at a campaign. I know Simon has the eyes on his lane. He's run his race. He's worked extremely hard over this period of time. You've alluded to the prolific amount of promotional material circulating and on display in the community. I think that is testament to his hard work and what he's thrown at this campaign, hoping to secure a seat.
Julie Collins, it is noticeable when you drive around Tasmania that the blue signs are everywhere, vastly outnumbering red signs. Were you simply caught napping, or are you being outspent on the campaign?
Well, we're always outspent by the Liberal Party, and there's always more blue signs. That doesn't necessarily mean that they always win, but clearly, they're in the lead tonight, and, clearly, when you've got more money like the Liberal Party has, that's what happens.
There has been a suggestion that you were caught napping with the early election. Were you prepared?
Well, obviously it was a year early. We'd rather that it was when it was supposed to be held, and the fact that it was called a year early on a false promise, I think the Tasmanian people are concerned about, and certainly I've been hearing that people are concerned about it. And interestingly, the pre-poll and the postals being up, I've been hearing from people that they were particularly concerned about going into polling booths and having to queue without having had their vaccine for COVID because of the COVID election. People are concerned that it was called early when it didn't have to be.
Was it difficult to actually organise signage, or was this a strategic decision?
Well, I think it was, and some of our candidates actually had problems printing signs because of production and COVID. And, as we know, we've had a lot of supplies that have been interrupted by COVID because of production lines, and certainly I have heard that some candidates had issues getting signs.
Jonathan Dunham, was the Liberal Party prepared long before the starter's gun went off?
I can assure you, Guy, they weren't. I know exactly the same issues were experienced by candidates right across our team, across the state. Accessing materials. I understand there's a shortage of actual core flute material, the material we use to print the election posters on. And wood. All of that was very, very difficult to muster in a very short period of time. There's been an extensive amount of work to fundraise, to deploy volunteers, to make sure material does hit letterboxes, so on and so forth. But look, we've done as much as we can in the short period of time we do have, but it hasn't been easy streets by any stretch to be organised like we would be in any ordinary campaign.
Now we've got Jeremy Rockcliffe, the Deputy Liberal Leader, up at the moment at Devonport Surf Lifesaving Club. But before we go to him, Anthony, can you give us an update?
Yeah, we've got 26% counted in Braddon, the most advanced of the counts. The Liberals are easily over 3 quotas. The Labor Party's on 1.5 quotas. The ungrouped, and I'll come on to that in a moment, 0.5. The Greens vote still very low, 0.366% of the vote. If we look at the change in votes since the last election, the Liberal vote's static, Labor vote down slightly, Green vote up slightly. The leading candidate, Jeremy Rockcliffe, has got 1.5 quotas. He's easily elected. Now, let's just look at the Liberal ticket on its own. Felix Ellis, who was elected on countback, is second and well on the way to being elected. Adam Brooks' vote is down about 6% on last time. So there's a big drop in his vote compared to last election. Roger Jensch is in 4th place and in danger of losing his seat. Now, the one warning I'd say about this, The candidates tend to come from different towns, Burnie versus Devonport versus Wynyard, so versus Ulverston. So those candidates may swap around, but Felix Ellis was consistently 5th place last time. This time is consistently 2nd place, so that's good news for Felix Ellis. On the Labor ticket, Justine Kay is the new candidate, but Shane Broad and Anita Dow are still polling at top 1 and 2 on the ticket. The difficulty is that they've only got 1.5 quotas in their own right at this stage. Now, I want to go back to the overall leaders. Let me see. This is the leaders display here. Let me get rid of that. Leaders. I think I've broken it. Here we go. Leaders. This gentleman, Craig Garland, the fisherman from Montague, he's currently polling ahead of the total for the Greens. If he stays there, then the Greens' preferences may flow to him, and he will feature later in the count. And that may happen, but it still requires Green voters to go beyond 5 preferences and to go to Garland rather than to Labor. So there's still the outside chance that Craig Garland could be competing with the second Labor candidate for the final seat. But to be honest, there's a lot more counting to come. And I think what's more likely is Craig Garland's vote will start to drop when we get into the big centres and when we get into the pre-polls.
Anthony, thank you. Jeremy Rockcliffe, congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. Look, Hare Clark system, you never quite know, but it looks promising so far. And this is my 6th election. They're all very different, and I'm very grateful for the support of our electorate.
Jeremy, it's Emily Baker here. We've heard that Peter Gutwein says he will resign if he's not elected in majority tonight. That isn't looking, or it's looking like that could be possible, that it could be a minority government. Are you possibly the next Premier of Tasmania?
Well, as Anthony just said, Emily, good evening, by the way, that it is early days yet. And, of course, Hare Clark elections are always very close. You can get a large vote and just get there when it comes to the numbers at the end of the day. But Peter Gutwein has been an outstanding Premier, an outstanding leader for the Liberal Party, and I'm very confident that we will get the numbers to form a majority government.
Just to push you slightly though, Peter Gutwein's made a big deal out of this. I assume there have been conversations in the background. Are you in line to take the reins if Peter Gutwein does step down?
Look, I'm not going to deal in hypotheticals, particularly at these early stages, but of course, look, I've been Deputy Leader of the party now for 15 years and 7 years in government, and we've been blessed with terrific leaders in Will Hodgman, and of course Peter Gutwein has been tremendous for Tasmania, keeping Tasmanians safe, and of course we always thank all Tasmanians for that. But of course I will always play a very constructive role, and you know, Peter Gutwein, my expectation will be that we will win a majority government. That's my expectation. Peter Gutwein will continue to be the Premier of Tasmania, as he deserves to be.
Do you want the top job?
Well, of course, I had the opportunity of the top job just before Peter took over, of course, and I said at the time that he would be a fantastic Premier. My judgment was right, and Peter Gutwein is still a fantastic Premier, of course, and my expectation is that he will, of course, will win a majority, but, you know, early days yet, as Anthony has said, but we're not going to deal in hypotheticals. We have been very clear that what Tasmania needs is a strong, stable majority government. Peter Gutwein to lead the Liberal Party and indeed Tasmania, and Tasmanians have responded.
Jeremy, we're looking at what appeared to be weak numbers for your colleague Roger Yench. He was a government frontbencher. He held the portfolios of housing, human services. We did see some pretty major issues in both of those, some of them that he seemed to be either unaware of or not dealing with. What do you make of his results so far?
Well, look, again, it's very early days, and I guess that's just a reflection of the very strong team that we have in Braddon, working together very strongly as a team for the last 5 weeks. Look, Roger's been a very capable minister dealing with some very difficult issues, and he's handled it, in my view, well, with the calmness, of course, and been very methodical in terms of his approach, and he's a caring person. And I'm sure that Roger will be still, of course, part of the Parliament when all the numbers are counted. He's a terrific fellow, and I'm sure he'll still get there. But look, it's early days yet in the Hare Clark system. As I say, this is my 6th election. Anything can happen, Emily, and it's early days yet.
Jeremy, lovely to see that you've got the ABC on in the background there. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks, Emily.
This is Tasmania Votes, live from the tally room in Hobart, with a swelling crowd behind us, gathering as people expect to hear from the leaders in what are going to be fascinating speeches later this evening. We're approaching 8 o'clock. 23% of the vote has been counted. Hello, I'm Guy Stainer.
And I'm Sabra Lane. And Anthony, what's the latest?
Well, let's look at that statewide vote. As you said, 23%. Heavily tilted towards Bass, Braddon and Lyons. The count's much less progressive in Franklin and Clark. Liberals have slipped back under 50% on our projection. Labor's still under 30% of projection. The Greens on 13, Shooters, Fishers, Farmers, Animal Justice and others on 4.8. Look at the change in vote here. And the Labor vote's down 3.9. Nearly all of that loss of support is in Clark, where their vote is down 20%. So all that drop is in Clark. The Green vote is up in both Clark and Franklin at this stage. So that's translating into an overall statewide there. And if we look at the current state of the chamber, the seats we're definitely giving away. We've got the Liberals on 11, Labor on 4, Greens on 1, and we can add a few more seats leaning that way from memory. And we're getting the Liberals up to 12, Labor 5 and the Greens 1. Now the Liberals, we've got them in 3 in Bass, Braddon and Lyons, 2 in Franklin. We've got them 1 in Clark, so that gets them to 12. They need 1 more seat. If they get a second seat in Clark, that's where they have a potential still to get a majority. There doesn't seem to be a chance for them to reach 4 in one of the northern or central electorates, and they don't look likely to get 3 in Franklin. So this is all going to come down to the last seats in Clark at this stage. Now, Legislative Council, which we don't often talk about. Craig Farrell, we've got 22% in Derwent. He's ahead on 47% against Ben Shaw from the Liberal Party. Craig Farrell was behind earlier as the larger booths from New Norfolk and the like have come in. Then he's pulled ahead. So at the moment, it looks like he's on track for re-election. We don't have any booth comparison in that electorate. I haven't heard anyone suggest he was likely to lose. The other electorate is Windermere, which covers the areas north of Launceston up to Georgetown. This is where Ivan Dean, the independent, is retiring. We just under 30% counted. Nick Dygan is on 37%. Jeff Lyons, a Labor, 25%. Will Smith, 24%. They don't have how-to-vote cards just to explain to people on the mainland. You normally look at this and say, what does a how-to-vote card say? There's no how-to-vote cards at elections in Tasmania. The candidates are also randomised on these single-member electorates as well. So the preference flows are not very strong. I would say on these numbers, Nick Dygan's has helped because he's on 37%. The question is, because this has been held on the same day as the House of Assembly for the first time, if Will Smith comes close to victory after preferences, then there will be a challenge in court. I'd almost think he's almost certain. The other thing to say to people is that we don't get preference counts in upper house counts here. They do not guess who's the final 2 candidates and do a throw. So we'll just get first preferences tonight, and they may or may not do a preference distribution tomorrow. But that's just to keep people up with the counts in Windermere and Derwent in the Legislative Council.
Anthony, thank you very much for that. Julie Collins, do you agree with Anthony there that it's all going to come down to Clark?
Well, unfortunately, it is looking like Clark will be critical.